So I first want to address some things about getting these plugs flush. You take a look at them, you can see how raised they are from when we started here. I am going to clamp this down, and I'm going to hand plane some of that off for us. Hand plane, just take the very top off. I'm not trying to cut into the actual cleat itself, just those plugs just a little bit, maybe 3 swipes each for the high ones, and then I'll go back and sand that. This tool here is a hold fast. You can certainly just clamp it to the table using one of the clamps that we have in class here. Case in point, these clamps here, these red ones that we've seen. But the hold fast, I'm going to set that down on a piece of scrap wood because I'm going to hammer that down to hold this thing onto the table here. So I'm just going to take my hand plane and knock these down to flush. So I'm not trying to, and by the way, this process here becomes a lot more complicated if you didn't line your grain up with the rail. Because then you're cutting across the grain, that's not quite as fun. And it has a greater chance of chipping out some of the board there. So now that's pretty flush. And I'm going to use some 120 grit paper to take that down. So I'm going to set it on my sanding block here, pull it back. Why do I not use an orbital here? Well, it's a pretty small width, and the orbital will be much wider than what that is, and then you run a risk of like bending over or rounding over your corners there, which is not what you want to do. And to be honest with you, I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but when I'm working in the shop, I want to create an environment that I like being in. I don't want sawdust really getting all over through the air for me to get into my lungs. And I like to be able to listen to music. So anytime that I can do the same process at about identical pace by hand that I can do with a machine, I'll do it by hand. I'm going to move up to a medium grit now. What these grits are, so like 80 grit, 120 grit, it's the size of the stone that's embedded on there. So like this 120 grit paper, there's little stones all over that are adhered to the paper there. The size of them is what determines what the grit is going to be. So that actually looks pretty darn good. And finally, I'll go over this with 220. And that is very smooth, okay? So now we want to talk about how we're going to lay out these rails here. So I'm going to get my hold fast down. I'm just going to pop the bottom of it. That'll lift that up, and I'll set that aside. Now we're going to turn our attention to the corner vise. Okay? So we have to lay out these cuts that are going to go into our rails. This is the back top. Let me see if I can find, we'll do the front bottom here. So the front bottom, I'm going to set this in here. And I'm going to bring you around where you can see a little better here. Okay? So if I set this in here like that, hopefully you can see that it's not even in the front there. And what it's supposed to be that there is 9/16 that is over top of that joint there, and there's 3/16 that are over the edge of the board there. So we want to cut out a small part that we're gonna be able to set this thing in here, and it's gonna sit flush with the front. So you can see that we have to cut out a little bit off that back side there. So I'm gonna look at the board. Is there a face that I like more than the other one? Really not. It's a pretty good looking piece of cherry. But I have FB labeled on here, and I'm gonna have that facing out when I'm done. So to mark that, to lay it out, I'm gonna have that facing in. And I'm gonna use a very well sharpened pencil. I'm going to hold that very tightly in its place. And I'm going to mark that bottom line there. So this means that that bottom line, I'm going to cut that portion out. So that I'll extend that line down the side here. So that the line I see there, if I line that up with that edge, you'll see that that indicates flush in the front there. That's how it's going to line up. However, I don't know which way it's going to be on a table saw, so I always will mark it once on that side there, boom, and then I'll spin it straight over, so I'm marking it on the backs on the other side at the same location here. So I'm going to have the same FB facing down. Hold it nice and tight, and I'll mark that. So I have lines there and the other side to show me what has to be removed. So I want to take that line off and the side next to it. Okay? One thing to also point out to you that a lot of people neglect to do is when we use this as a guide for drawing, we get graphite on here. So it's really easy to get off, but it's just one of those things that people neglect to do. So I'm going to take my eraser here and I'm just going to erase that front edge there. And very honestly, that did it. I'll just take that block piece of sandpaper again. I'm just going to go a little bit on the front here. And now I don't have to worry about that again. That's done. If you put your rail on and you still have that pencil there, it becomes right at a joint where you have grains that are opposing one another, perpendicular to one another. And then it's really tough to get that off at that point. So we have our rail laid out there. We still recall we have to put 2 plugs in here so that when we attach this onto the end here eventually, we're going to drive 2 screws through here. Okay? So in terms of this week, that's all I'm going to show you. So you get about 15-20 minutes worth of video to look at, to respond to. And then next week what we're going to do is we're going to cut out the rabbet joint there so that it sits in there flush. And we're also going to drill our holes for the plugs, which is something that you've seen before, but I just want to show you the layout again. And then we'll cut off the back side of this. I have an extra board here because I had people talk about, do we really need to be using a table saw for a lot of these things like these cuts here? Could we have used a bandsaw to cut in and then come around here? Well, I'm just going to mark this out. This is not the correct rail, obviously it's not wide enough, but I'm going to mark out that, and I'll also mark out flush. Okay, so I'm going to grab a small square and I'll draw this all the way around here. And I just want to cut this out on I'm just going to return that line all the way around. And I'll draw my line square here also. So we want to cut out this section right here. So this shaded section here and all along there, so that it'll fit in there, just how we're talking about. Okay? So I'm going to go over to the bandsaw and I'm going to show you what this would look like on the bandsaw. So I have on the bandsaw, I have already squared this up. Square it up, I do my combination square, lay it down flat, bring that up, look at it, and it looks like it's dead on. Okay? So I'll cut this with the bandsaw. And I'll bring down my guides again. Turn it on. Let's just see how that fits. So here's what we're doing eventually with those other boards too. We're putting in this notch or rabbet off the back side here. And it looks like it didn't cut that little square there. I'm not sure. If you look at the end of that, it looks like it's tapered. It's not, the faces aren't parallel. Let's take a look at what we have here though. So it's a little bit off there in the front there. You know, it's not horrible, you know. This is a method for doing it if you don't have a table saw. One thing you don't have is when you have the cutting face of a bandsaw there, is you have some more irregularities to it. There are people who have better blades on their bandsaw than I do, that the cut that they have would produce a little bit cleaner and it'll be a good glue joint for the cut. I don't. Okay, my bandsaw is doesn't leave the most outstanding faces there. So if that were the case, I might have to go through with a small rabbeting plane. This is a rabbeting plane, and this is a regular block plane like we've used in class. The rabbeting plane has the blade that goes all the way out to the edges here, so I could go across. You go across this and come all the way up to the shoulder there and take some off, and that would clean that up, make it a better glue joint surface. But, okay. All right, guys. I will talk to you again next week.